Australia is at war. After 3 years of fighting Germany and its allies, it is now threatened by a new enemy, Japan. On February 19, 1942, Japan launches a surprise bombing raid on Darwin, killing more than 200 people. With invasion seemingly imminent and most Australian soldiers far from home, reserve forces have been sent to New Guinea to stop the Japanese advancing to mainland Australia.
Morning.
Morning. Had a horrible night. Mozzies.
Yeah, me too. How old are you anyway?
19. 20 next month. I wanted to join the Air Force. They weren't taking. Tried to join the AIF and they were only taking militia, so instead of fighting Germans, I end up here. And what have we been doing? Digging holes.
Well, better than the boys in the 53rd. Half of them don't want to be in the army, let alone here in Moresby. Haven't even used rifles before.
Well, they won't be much good when the Japs get here.
This is the unit colour patch of the 39th Battalion, brown over red. The 39th Battalion was from Victoria and was a militia unit. Being militia meant they weren't professional soldiers, but had been trained to protect Australia in the event of war. In reality, the 39th weren't very well trained, didn't have modern equipment, and many were very young men. The militiamen were known as chocos, or chocolate soldiers, because it was thought they'd melt in battle due to their lack of training and experience. While a lot of militia were volunteers, Australian men could also be conscripted or forced to join. They weren't allowed to serve overseas, but in 1942, Papua and New Guinea were territories of Australia and under its control. Around 5,000 militiamen were shipped off to Port Moresby in December 1941. Japan attempted to take control of Port Moresby by air and sea. Air raids became common. The Australians expected a large-scale attack at any time, but they felt pretty safe from attack from the north, with the dense jungle and mountain range of the Owen Stanleys protecting them.
"49 planes in attack, heaviest raid on Moresby." The heaviest attack yet made against Port Moresby was launched by the Japanese on Monday. No fewer than 34 heavy bombers and 15 Zero fighters took part. The increasing severity of the enemy raids against Port Moresby indicates clearly that his future plans for operation in the Southwest Pacific area are based upon gaining possession of Port Moresby. It is the unanimous opinion of informed observers in Australia that the enemy cannot proceed to carry out his plans for the direct invasion of Australia until he obtains complete control of New Guinea.
It's an air raid.
After months of air raids, the fight is coming to Port Moresby by land. A small force of Australian troops is sent to cross the Owen Stanley Ranges, a back-breaking mountainous climb in dense jungle. Narrow tracks quickly turn to rivers of mud. Ahead of them, the village of Kokoda and its airstrip. On July 21st, 1942, Japanese forces land in the island's north at Buna, and thousands begin making their way to Port Moresby. First, they must take Kokoda.
Oh, I've had it. We've been walking for days.
Yeah.
It's wet. Can't see anything in this muck but more bloody jungle and more bloody hills.
Jeez.
If I see another one...
You what? Anyway, we're nearly at the top.
Here, pass me that stick.
The track is narrow and muddy and stretches 96 kilometres between Owers Corner and Kokoda. The Australians used whatever they could find to help them up the track, with the journey to Kokoda taking 8 days. By the time the 39th Battalion even encountered the Japanese, they would be wet, tired and covered in mud.
The rough mountain trail, which is the road to this front, is one of the strangest warpaths in the world. It passes through an almost unknown world of river, forest, jungle and mountain.
Thanks. Well, this isn't the top at all.
You'd think going down would be better. It's a damn sight worse.
The first half an hour I thought, no, I'll never do this. I was exhausted, but I didn't like to show it to anyone, particularly to the country blokes, because they were going along all right. And after he got to Uberry, I'd absolutely stonk it.
Men, we have to hold the plateau. We need that airstrip.
The airfield at Kokoda was the only place an aircraft could land for 100 kilometres in either direction. Holding it meant reinforcements and supplies could be flown in. The plateau itself is a strong defensive position. The soldiers of the 39th Battalion weren't the only ones defending Kokoda. The Papuan Infantry Battalion, a volunteer force of Papuan men led by Australian officers, were the first to come in contact with the Japanese advance. They were also joined by the Australian New Guinea Administrative Unit, who would largely be responsible for organising labour and supplies throughout the campaign.
Incoming! Take cover! We're under fire! I can't see them! Down there! Aim for the scrub! They're in there! Can't see them! I need help! Ammunition! Bring some ammunition!
Fighting against unbeatable odds, the Australians are pushed back by the Japanese. Exhausted, outnumbered and outgunned, they dig in at a village called Izurava. Down to just a few hundred men, facing thousands, they await reinforcements, experienced soldiers fresh from Australia.
When do you reckon the AIF are getting here?
Soon. We've been hearing about them for days now.
AIF stands for Australian Imperial Force. The AIF was a volunteer army, raised for serving both at home and overseas in times of war. In February 1942, Australian Prime Minister John Curtin recalled part of the army to Australia. After that point, the AIF's 6th and 7th Divisions had mostly been fighting in the Middle East. Australia started working closely with the United States to repel Japan's advances in the Pacific. In just a few months, Japan had swept through Southeast Asia, taking country after country. US General Douglas MacArthur was given charge of Australia's defence. Under him was Australian General Sir Thomas Blamey. In August, they sent part of the 7th Division to Port Moresby to stop Japanese forces.
Dig in at this position. They'll attack in the morning.
Poorly equipped, most didn't have anything designed for digging. Digging in meant digging a trench for protection. Without anything better at hand, the soldiers dug using bayonets, bully beef tins, helmets, sometimes even their bare hands.
On their way to reinforce the spent militia, Australia's most experienced troops are forced to halt. They wait at a dried-out lake called Myola for urgent supplies to arrive, but time is running out for the militiamen.
Two full battalions, the 2nd 14th and 2nd 16th, are on their way to Isurava to relieve the 39th. Totaling more than 1,000 men, they are in desperate need of food and other equipment. With no other option, the supplies must be dropped by air.
We left the base originally with six days rations per man, and by the time we got to Myola, that was the 5th day. And what happened to the rations that were supposed to be there for us, nobody's ever been able to satisfactorily explain.
After days of fighting at Isurava, the militia welcome the arrival of the AIF. Even with their help, the situation is dire as they vainly attempt to hold the Japanese back.
Keep your heads down! Get down! Go everywhere!
The Japanese had a big advantage over the Australians when it came to weaponry. At Isurava they had 6 artillery pieces, bigger guns which could fire larger shells at greater distances. They included 2 75mm mountain guns, 2 70mm infantry guns, and 2 37mm guns. These weapons could do a great deal of damage, and were key in pressing back the Australians at this stage of the campaign. In contrast, the Australians had a single 3-inch mortar at their disposal.
Reload! Ammunition! Bring some ammunition! Watch out! Ah! Medic! I need a medic here! They're broken through the lines!
Follow me. We can turn them back.
Anyway, Bruce is firing his Bren gun from the hip, And that's a very difficult thing to do. And he's fighting it very well indeed. He was a great soldier. And with very good result too. He brought down a lot of them. As we got through just to the other side of this bit of a clearing, there was a small hill. And we stopped because there were two of our chaps up on top of it. They'd been up there cut off and been surrounded by the Japanese. And we stopped to talk to them to find out what they were doing, really. And Bruce was killed. Which is, I blame myself because I should never have stopped.
At least 99 Australians are killed in the fighting at Isurava, despite inflicting much greater casualties. The Japanese army still vastly outnumbers the Australians, who are forced to retreat once more. Many are wounded and flee through the jungle. Others are suffering from diseases like malaria. Those who can walk have to make it on their own. Some are stretchered to safety by carriers the troops have come to call fuzzy-wuzzy angels.
We'll get moving again in a minute.
Me ama mas longer from you pala.
It's thought they helped save hundreds of lives, but many didn't have much choice. The Papuans were often conscripted and worked in tough conditions with little shelter, food or pay. Sometimes they were bullied or beaten, or made promises of rewards or freedom that would later be broken. Some deserted, some chose to help the Japanese, some really did volunteer. Many Australian soldiers felt indebted to the Papuans for their care during the campaign.
You know, it's not the enemy, it's the disease that gets you. When we got to Moresby, everyone had dysentery. Up here, it's worse.
Both Australian and Japanese troops suffered greater casualties from sickness rather than battle. Mosquitoes spread diseases like malaria and dengue fever. Many soldiers got diarrhea and dysentery from contaminated food and waste.
Under orders from Port Moresby to halt the Japanese attack, the Australians make another stand at Mission Ridge and Brigade Hill. The Australians are forced to retreat again after 3 days of intense fighting, badly hurt by a flanking Japanese force. Newly arrived AIF Battalion, the 2nd 27th, become cut off and must make their own way to safety.
This way.
Pressure to stop the Japanese here came from Port Moresby. As the campaign progressed, the Australian troops had several different leaders. Brigadier Arnold Potts first took command during the campaign at Isurava, and also led at Mission Ridge and Brigade Hill. He'd been given the difficult task of recapturing Kokoda. With leaders back in Port Moresby and Australia unaware of the situation on the ground, Arnold Potts was criticised for his tactical decision to withdraw, and he was soon relieved of his command. Others suffered similar fates. Both General Blamey and US General Douglas MacArthur expressed their unhappiness with the campaign's progress. This upset a lot of the soldiers who had fought so hard for Australia.
He was lost in this mountain jungle because once we're off the track, well, look, you might have been adrift in the ocean without a chart. And so we were 14 days adrift, and so we hadn't had too much food once we'd got into the mountains, and so from then onwards there was none. What transpires is that your stomach shrinks. And so it's amazing how it's the first few days are the worst. You're very conscious of not having any food. And so anyway, that's when I started, and I wasn't the first. And I certainly wasn't the last, and whereby eating grass and leaves. And that's what's how I got through 14 days.
The Japanese Army's advance is relentless, coming within sight of Port Moresby for the first time in 2 months of fighting. Led by Major General Horry, the Japanese have proven to be well-trained soldiers, but they too are tired, hungry, and sick. As they edge ever closer to Port Moresby, failure elsewhere in the Pacific leads to a halt in the attack.
Look, Port Moresby. A few more days of fighting, and we'll have food.
Port Moresby was just 32 kilometers away from Japanese positions at Iorubaiwa. From here, soldiers could see its searchlights. They were told victory was just days away. The Japanese diet consisted largely of rice, biscuits, and preserved food. By this point, rations had been drastically cut because of the lack of supplies reaching troops on the front line. Many were sick, hungry, and exhausted.
Like a bolt from the blue, we received an order to withdraw at 11:30. It left us momentarily in a daze. It is truly regrettable to retreat from our present position after pressing so close to Moresby at the cost of enormous sacrifices and casualties.
At Iorubaiwa, we received a command saying we should retreat. Our morale dropped when we were told to retreat. We called it advance backwards, and at that time we began to retreat.
Take what you can! Prepare to withdraw!
The Japanese army begins its retreat from Iorubaiwa. It hasn't given up hope of taking Fort Moresby and defends a series of positions along the track. Each time, Australian forces push them back. Soon, Kokoda is in sight once more.
Gone. No one's here.
Kokoda recaptured after 36-day advance. Enemy convoy forced back from Boina. 36 days after starting their northward advance at Iorubaiwa Ridge, Australian troops have recaptured the strategic village of Kokoda on the north side of the Owen Stanley Range in New Guinea. They are pursuing the retreating enemy towards Oivi. A Japanese bid to land about 7,000 reinforcements from two big transports near Boina was defeated by heavy Allied air attacks, and the convoy was forced to retire towards New Britain.
There was no band, no cheering, just hundreds of weary Australians standing silently to attention in the rain.
Retaking Kokoda was an important step to driving Japan out of Papua and New Guinea, but most of the fighting was still to come. After Kokoda, Australia would fight alongside the US in forcing the Japanese back to and out of their main base at Bunagona. In the following months, thousands of lives would be lost on both sides, but that wasn't the end either. The Second World War would continue until Japan's surrender in August 1945. All up, more than 27,000 Australians were killed. 23,500 were wounded, and more than 30,000 were taken prisoner between 1939 and 1945. Of those, 625 Australians were killed in the Kokoda campaign, and 1,055 were wounded. Many, including Private Bruce Kingsbury, have their final resting place here at Bomana War Cemetery in Port Moresby. The Kokoda campaign was just a small part of Australia's involvement in the Second World War, but it remains an important symbol of Australians fighting to protect their homeland at a time when they truly believed it was under threat, of coming through against the odds and making do in difficult situations. It too holds significance to the people of Japan, Papua New Guinea, and the United States. And it's why, every year, thousands still pay tribute to those who fought and died here by walking the Kokoda track.